They told me when I was 12 that if I ever spoke, I would not live to see the morning. I am 79 now, Margaret Maggie O'Neill of Leeds, and I have kept that sentence folded inside me like a note slipped beneath a door. Before we go further, a gentle word. This story brushes against painful memory. If it nudges the edges of yours, breathe with me, and only stay so long as you feel safe. It is raining tonight, the way Yorkshire remembers how steady, fine needles tapping the red brick roofs. The kettle hums on the hob, a small, faithful thing, and the silver safety chain on my front door glints whenever a car passes. I speak in the quiet kitchen where my life has so often begun again. Steam on the window, a mug warming my palms, and the clock over the pantry clicking like a soft metronome. I'm telling this not for spectacle, not to unspool the past for the sake of it, but because there is a difference between surviving and living, and somewhere along the years, I decided to choose the second. If you are listening from a terrace in Birmingham or a cottage in Kent, from a tower block in Glasgow or a seaside flat in Whitby, you're welcome here. We will keep the lights low and the language kind. I will not show you what does not need to be seen. I will, however, name what asked to remain unnamed. And then, slowly, we will make tea and go on. The sentence that tried to own my breath arrived in an ordinary house on an ordinary street, when the rain on the slates sounded just like this close, domestic, almost friendly. I will not embroider what happened. I will not strip it of its weight either. I will say only that a grown man found power in silence, and a little girl learned to count the seconds between the front door latch and the scrape of a chair in the kitchen. For years afterwards, I could tell you the difference between footsteps on the flags outside and footsteps in the hall. I could tell you the hour by the pitch of the wind. Tonight, I put the chain across out of habit. I pour Earl Grey and let the steam rise, as if the kettle knows the vocabulary of comfort better than I do. I am not 12. I am not even 40. I am the age where neighbors call me love, and the GP reminds me to bring a cardigan. But memory keeps its own clock, and if you listen with me, you will hear it. The rain, the kettle, the door. 3 small instruments tuning themselves. 3 ordinary sounds that once felt like the difference between fear and safety. You and I will not stay in the doorway forever. We will walk through this house, room by room, and I will show you how the weather changed. But first, let me take your hand to the threshold where it began. To the week an old man came to live with us, and the rules of our home shifted by degrees. The way a sky darkens before anyone admits it is night. Shall we step inside? Before anything twisted, life was arranged like the tins in Mum's pantry, labels out, everything in its place. We were a 3-room up, 2-room down terrace in Leeds, soot-softened brick, and a narrow yard where washing lines drew white flags between back doors. My mother, Elaine, woke at 5 for her shift at the bakery. She would come home sugar-dusted, the scent of warm loaves clinging to her cardigan. My father, Thomas, took nights at the rail depot, a man who could read the timetable the way other men read the sports pages. We had a cat who ignored us and a budgie that never did. On Sundays, with the bells from St. Mary's, Dad would carve a modest roast as if it were ceremony. I learnt my sums on the oilcloth table under the soft tick of the kitchen clock, and movement through the house obeyed invisible courtesies, boots off by the back door, voices low after 10. The kettle offered before any hard conversation. If you had asked me then what safety sounded like, I'd have said the rattle of the letterbox, Mum humming Scarborough Fair, the kettle coming to the brink and then drawing back. Childhood had its thin winters and mended sleeves, but it also had an order that felt like kindness. A door that closed, a bed that knew my shape. I want you to know this first, the ordinary sweetness, so you can hear how precisely the weather changed when someone else began to carry the key. He came in on a Wednesday, with rain shining on his hat and a suitcase that had known other hallways. Arthur Bennett, my maternal grandfather, just until he's back on his feet, Mum said, folding an extra blanket as if hospitality were a shield. We moved furniture to suit the guest, the best chair by the fire, a lamp dragged closer, the sideboard cleared of our clutter. His things took their place, a brass-handled walking stick, a tobacco tin, a razor strop that looked like an old strap from school. He watched the room the way a man watches a bus timetable, calculating, unblinking. At first, there were courtesies. He called me pet and asked about school. He told stories from halls I'd never seen long winters, ration books, colliery lads with hands like coal. But the house noticed a shift before I did. Windows were opened or shut without it asking. The wireless dial paused at stations we never chose. The cat stopped crossing the hearth. The nights my father worked late became longer somehow. The air stretched thin. A cough began to mark the corridor, a heavy, tarry punctuation in the dark. On the fridge, Mum pinned Dad's rota. The blue squares of night shift stood like small cold ponds on the month. I learned to count through them with my eyes, a quiet arithmetic. If you stood in our kitchen then, you might not have named it change, but if you stood very still, you would have felt the house measuring itself around a new center of gravity, and none of us asked who had appointed it. Rules arrived without handwriting. "Mind your skirt length," said to the room, though the room was only me. "No visitors when your father's at work. Doors stay unlocked till midnight. A house should breathe." We had always used the chain. Mum liked the click. He had opinions about my hair, neat plaits, no ribbons, and about how fast a girl should walk coming home. He corrected how I set knives beside plates, how I folded tea towels, how I spoke my vowels. None of it criminal, none of it even loud, just a thin film laid on everything. Mum tried to soften the edges. "He's old, love. The war made people particular," and pressed another hone into my palm. I nodded and learnt to carry quiet, the way some children carry a school bag that's too heavy for the strap. Those weeks trained my ears. Footsteps on the pavement meant neighbors, gossip, charity 'tis. Footsteps on the hall runner meant something else. The calendar turned. The blue night shift squares kept coming, like beads you can't stop clicking between your fingers. I began making private maps, the safe places in the house, the times of day when the street was fullest, the cupboard where Mum kept the torch. None of this is melodrama. It is simply the way a child learns to plot exits when the air starts keeping secrets. If you had visited then, we would have made you tea. You would have tasted the jam and said it was lovely. And yet, somewhere between the clink of teaspoon and the swallow, you might have noticed my eyes tracking the chain on the door. By November, the daylight left early. And the rain did what Yorkshire rain does best: arrived, stayed, settled into the mortar. Dad's rota put 'em out 3, sometimes 4 nights a week. On those evenings, the house braced itself, curtains drawn before the street lamps blinked on, kettle filled in advance, the radio tuned to the shipping forecast as if the North Sea's weather could stand guard for us. Arthur coughed in the hallway and cleared his throat before entering a room, a habit that felt like a rehearsal for appearing. When he moved, he wanted the house to hear it. I learnt the precise pitch of the back door latch. I learnt to time my homework to Mum's return, to the moment the bakery scent came back with her a sugared reassurance, a shield in an apron. She was trying to keep us knitted together. She'd ask about Latin verbs and tuck a strand of hair behind my ear while keeping her own gaze steady on the edges of the room. If you listened closely, you could hear 2 clocks now, the kitchen's faithful tick, and another meaner metronome that counted down the spaces when Dad was not there. None of this, on its own, is a headline. But life doesn't announce its headlines as they happen. It accumulates weather, and one day you realize you are standing in rain that has become a storm. The week everything broke open, it was raining like this. The kettle sang and then fell quiet, and somewhere between those 2 notes, poets, I understood that an ordinary house can teach a child extraordinary caution. We had reached the threshold. Next comes the moment when a mother asks a question no one wants to ask, and the room decides it will tell the truth. It was a school night, rain tinning the yard and the smell of warm bread clinging to Mum's sleeves. She set 2 mugs of tea on the oilcloth and stood, instead of sitting, as if the chair might take sides. "Mags," she said. She only used the short name when her voice wanted to be braver than her heart. "Have you been feeling all right at home?" I watched the steam turn to threads against the window. The clock kept faith with the seconds. Somewhere down the terrace, a door slammed, and the cat bolted under the sideboard as if it had read my mind. There are questions that are keys. They do not open rooms, they unlock breath. I felt mine shudder, old and careful as a bird cupped in 2 hands. I didn't look towards the hallway. I looked at the mug. I said the first true thing I could manage: I don't feel safe when Dad's on nights. Mum didn't gasp. She didn't fill the silence with apologies. She moved the kettle off the hob, placed her palm flour-dry, bakery-warm flat on the table, and said very softly, "You're safe with me. Tell me what I need to know, and not a word more. I will not describe what has no right to be described. I will tell you how it sounded to say it aloud." The house did not fall down. The lamp did not flicker. The world did not end. But the shape of the room changed, as if a wall we had lived beside for months had quietly been pushed back, and fresh air found us. I spoke in ordinary words, because that is what was taken from me. Thee had ordinary. I said when I felt afraid. I said whose footsteps made me stand still. I said wherein the house my shoulders learned to live near my ears. Mum listened the way paramedics listen, eyes steady, hands ready, not wasting my courage by looking away. When I ran out of words, she gave me hers to borrow. "It was wrong. It was not your fault. You did nothing to deserve this." Each sentence laid a floorboard between us, firm enough to take weight. And then she took a breath that had the sound of a promise in it and said, "All right, we move now." Things began quietly, which is another kind of grace. Mum locked the back door and slid the chain across the front, a simple act we had been told was unnecessary. She rang Mrs. Ellis, who knew what to do when families met nights like ours. She pinned Dad's rota to the notice board and wrote 3 numbers next to it. She found my cardigan and said we might go for a short walk to clear our heads, and we did, only as far as the end of the street where the lamplight pooled and the pavement smelled of rain. I remember the way the world looked ordinary and miraculous at once. Bins out for collection, a pram inside a porch, a puddle catching the glow of a kitchen I did not live in. "Tomorrow," Mum said, voice steady as the drizzle. "We see the GP after that. We do the next right thing. You don't have to be brave all at once." We turned back, and the house did a new thing. It welcomed us. The chain clicked into place with the satisfaction of a lid finding its jar. I slithered in Mum's room, the cat wedged like a sentry between our feet. In the night I woke once to rain and once to my own breath, easy, untangled, as if a fist had opened. Morning decided to be ordinary. Post through the letterbox, the milk on the step, Dad's shaving brush waiting for the weekend. But ordinariness had changed its allegiance. It belonged to us again. I ate toast without counting the footsteps in the corridor. Mum stood at the sink, sleeves rolled, light on her wedding band. "We go together," she said, meaning not just to the surgery, not just through forms and rooms and retellings, but through whatever came next. She tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, the smallest ritual, and the house seemed to agree. The hallway, which had grown strange to me, remembered who we were. On the table, Mum left a handwritten note folded once. 3 words, the square, everyday kind, "You are safe." I put it in my pocket and felt its paper corner all day like a compass. If a story has a muscle, this is when ours flexed for the first time. The rain had not stopped. It seldom does when you ask it to. But we had learned something about weather. You can't command it, only prepare, only walk through with company. The next part is what happens when the world outside hears your truth and starts to move carefully, professionally, like a team entering a dark room with their torches high. Our GP de Patel had a waiting room of raincoats and magazines gone soft with years. She opened the door herself and said my name as if it were something intact. Mum sat beside me, hands on her knees, ready to steady the air if it tilted. We did not offer details, we offered facts. Dr. Patel listened with a patience that felt like a warm lamp. She explained the path ahead in ordinary steps, medical notes first, a safeguarding referral, support for Mum as well as me. She told me I could stop at any point, that my body and my words were both mine to pace. Forms appeared not as hurdles, but as bridges. I watched her write with a fountain pen that made careful consonants, as if she were spelling out a map. When she finished, she looked up and said, "You did the hardest part already. You told the truth." She asked if we needed a quiet room before we left. We did. And in that small pause, I sipped water and learned something new. The world has rooms prepared for nights like ours. Outside, the receptionist called us love without pity, and the door opened onto a street that hadn't changed, and yet it had. You cannot see relief, not really, but you can feel how your coat sits lighter on your shoulders. The police station smelt faintly of polish and damp wool. A woman, Sergeant Hughes, with neat handwriting and kind eyes, guided us to a room where the walls held nothing sharp. She said we could take breaks. She said Mum could speak or simply be there. She explained that my words would be recorded so I would not have to repeat them to more rooms than necessary. When I could not find a word, she did not hurry me toward one. She offered a simpler word and waited. There was a quiet clock here, too, and the tapping of rain against a high window. I anchored myself to those sounds and to Mum's steady breathing and to the pen that moved without judgment. After, Sergeant Hughes gave us a leaflet I never read fully, but kept for months anyway, the way you keep a spare key in a drawer you never open. "We will be in touch," she said, and it did not sound like a phrase people say. It sounded like a promise people keep. In the corridor, a young constable asked if we had someone to walk home with us. We did ourselves together under one umbrella that was not quite big enough and yet somehow sufficient. News travels even when no one means it to. On our terrace, kindness and curiosity share a hallway. At St. Mary's, Father Brennan paused longer than usual when shaking hands after Mass. At school, a girl in my form looked at me the way you look at a thing you're not meant to touch. Labels arrived the way November mist arrives, soft at first and then everywhere. Victim, poor thing, trouble. I learned how to walk through corridors that spoke without moving their lips. Mrs. Ellis, the social worker Dr. Patel had rung, taught me a counterweight, agency. "You decide what's yours," she said. "You decide what you do with your day." So I made a small list. No one else needed to see. Read one page at the library, drink tea hot, write one sentence that begins with "I want." Meanwhile, Mum began to say out loud to neighbors, in the measured way only brave people manage, "We're dealing with something and we're getting help." That phrase built a low wall around us, porous enough for care, high enough to keep out the wrong questions. If shame came down the street, it found our door closed and the chain across clicked, not out of fear, but out of choice. There were calls from people whose job it is to stand with you. Victim support, a counselor with an appointment at a sensible hour, someone from school who promised extensions on homework with no fuss. There were letters with reference numbers and appointments that made our calendar look like a railway timetable, orderly and bewildering at once. I discovered the relief of tasks, washing up, pegging shirts on the line, learning how the peg marks leave neat little moons in cotton when the sun finally visits. Mum phoned Nana in Whitby and said only what needed saying. We bought a fresh notebook. On the first page I wrote, "We began." That evening, Mum stood at the sink and said, "It will be a process," as if process were a word that could carry weight without collapsing. We ate something simple. We slept. Outside, Leeds went on being Leeds, buses late, dogs hopeful, rain persistent. Inside, the house continued its quiet mending. Not every door that opens is an invitation. Not every closed door is a defeat. We were learning the difference. Mrs. Ellis's office had 2 windows and a plant that leaned towards the light as if it knew something about persistence. The chairs were the sort that didn't squeak when you changed your mind. She began with ground rules that felt like handrails. I could stop, I could stand, I could ask for water. We would never go faster than my breath. We practiced saying ordinary words and letting them be enough. She taught me a trick with my feet, pressing them into the floor, noticing heel-arched toes, so the present could find me when memory tried to borrow my name. Outside, buses sighed at the lights. Inside, she asked about what made mornings easier. "A list of 3, I said, surprised to hear it make the bits. "Open the curtains, put the kettle on. Healing," she explained, "is mostly repetition with kindness." I went home carrying nothing but a business card and a sentence: "You are allowed to take up space." That evening, the kettle hummed. I watched the steam spiral as if it were threading something back through the day. It did not fix me. It steadied me, which turned out to be the braver wish. And as I rinsed the mugs, I realized steadiness has a sound, quiet, domestic, stubborn, and I wanted more of it. We began to mark the days with small rituals, because small rituals keep promises that big ones can't. At 4 o'clock, Earl Grey and 2 biscuits. After tea, a 10-minute tidy that never chased perfection, only restored order enough to breathe. I wrote 1 true line in a notebook, no eloquence required, then underlined the word that mattered most. Mum moved the armchair nearer the window. We let the rain be a soundtrack rather than a threat. On Saturdays, I walked to the library and sat near the radiators, reading the beginnings of books and giving myself permission not to finish them. The cat appointed herself keeper of laps, and we practiced the chain on the door as an act of choosing, not fear. Click, breathe, carry on. On the worst days, we cooked something that needed stirring for a long time, soup custard, so the spoon and the steam could anchor our hands. Progress did not arrive with a fanfare. It arrived in the way my shoulders remembered they were not earrings, in the way sleep came without bargaining, in the way I laughed one evening at a daft advert and did not apologize for it. The house had new corners, now corners where we did not flinch, and that felt like moving back in. Kindness found us in our postcode. Dr. Patel rang once, not for information, just to ask if the appointments were working for me. I said yes, because going slowly was, in its way, a form of courage. Mrs. Patel next door knocked with samosas that smelt like holidays, then stood in the doorway and taught me a simple breathing pattern she used in prayer. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. Longer out than in, she said, so your nervous system believes you. We tried it together while the rain tested the guttering, and afterwards, the world looked fractionally more possible. I put the pattern on a card and stuck it near the kettle. On Sundays, I started reading at church again, voice steadier each week, letting the vowels belong to me. There were setbacks, of course there were, but setbacks are not verdicts. They are weather. When they came, we did the next right thing, rang someone, made tea, sat where the light was. On a Tuesday in late spring, I walked past a particular doorway and did not cross the street. It was nothing to anyone else and everything to me. Healing doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. One afternoon, I realized the plant in Mrs. Ellis's room had grown new leaves, and so had I. And then the phone rang with news that would test all this careful mending. Someone had been seen near our street, and night was coming in fast. It was Mrs. Nolan from 3 doors down who rang, voice wrapped in apology. "Mags, love might be nothing, but I thought I saw someone who looked like your granddad lingering by the alley near the off-license. didn't like the way he was watching the terraces. The afternoon was sullen with cloud. The cat slept like punctuation on the armchair. Mum listened, thanked her, and when she put the phone down, I saw something in her face I hadn't seen since the bakery queues of the miners' strike of practical steel. "All right," she said. "We go to our plan." We checked the chain, tested the back door bolt, moved the torch to the worktop, put the old cast-iron pan within reach. Not drama, preparation. She rang 101 to log the sighting. The woman on the line said to call 999 if anything changed. I wrote the numbers again on a fresh card, as if ink could keep time with fear. Outside, the sky gathered itself. I boiled the kettle and left it full. Mum laid the corridor rug flat so no one would trip. Calm is a skill you practice before you need it. We were rehearsing the notes quietly, so our hands would remember if our minds stuttered. By evening, rain had come on like Yorkshire means it, steady, committed. The estate's orange street lamps smeared themselves in the wet. Dad was on a double at the depot. Mrs. Ellis had reminded us of our script for nights like this. We kept the curtains closed and the lights layered, one lamp in the front room, the hallway bulb off so we could see shadows before they saw us. Just after 9, the house hiccuped. A pop from somewhere near the meter, a sigh from the fridge, and the rooms fell into that particular silence. Electricity leaves behind, power cut. In the dark, rain sounds busier, as if it has been promoted. Mum's hand found mine and squeezed twice the signal we'd practiced for, "I'm here." She clipped the torch on and set it to a low, steady beam. "We stick to the plan," she said, and sent me to the phone. The chain was across, the bolt was firm, the back door was as it should be. Still, somewhere beneath the weather, the yard offered a sound it didn't usually make, a slow testing pressure on the handle, like someone learning the alphabet of the latch. The air thinned the way it does on a steep hill. I felt my breath look for the pattern Mrs. Patel had given me. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. The out-breath arrived like a friend. I dialed 99 and told the operator our postcode, our names, our fear in that order. She matched me for calm. "Units are on their way. Stay where you are. Keep talking to me." I kept talking. The torch laid a gentle coin of light on the back door key. Mum stood square to the kitchen. Cast-iron pan balanced low at her seat, not a threat, a boundary. The handle at the back door gave a little, then gave up, a pause, then the softer sound of movement along the path, a hand touching brick, the rain doing its steady work of making everything honest. "Police will be with you any minute," the woman said, and I believed her because her voice made belief easier than doubt. On another night, I might have been 12 again. Tonight, I was the age I actually was, standing in my own kitchen, naming what was mine. I noticed the ordinary. The tea towel damp from earlier, the draft where the letterbox never quite sits right, the clock continuing because that's what clocks do, even when houses hold their breath. We waited without shrinking. We did not open the door. The patrol car's tires hissed into the puddles like commas, then full stop. A knock at the front, the kind the police use, firm, identified, respectful. Mum answered with the chain across. "West Yorkshire Police," a voice said, and gave our names back to us as proof he should be there. 2 officers stepped into our hallway. One moved him towards the yard with a torch. The other stayed with us. Questions neat and quick. There were footprints, turning to soup in the mud by the back step, the bolt marked where it had been tried. No dramatic chase, no shouted scene, just notes taken, radios murmuring, the cool, practical attention of people who do this work. They asked if we could come to the station in the morning to give statements. We said yes. Before they left, one officer fixed the letterbox draft excluder that had always wobbled in unremarkable kindness. That still makes me want to cry when I think of it. When the power thumped back on, the fridge cleared its throat, and the lamp remembered itself. The house exhaled so softly you might have missed it. We washed 2 mugs we didn't need to wash and stood side by side at the sink the way we used to between the bakery and the rail depot, mother and daughter returning to the ordinary as if it were a harbor. The courtroom looked nothing like the rooms that had helped us so far. It was larger, tuttier, a place where words wore uniforms. We were guided to a quiet witness room first, the kettle already plugged in as if someone had anticipated the shape of our nerves. I gave my statement the way a person climbs a hill steady, breath by breath, looking up only at the next few feet. There were barristers with crisp voices, and a judge who listened as if listening itself were part of the law. I do not remember the legal phrasing. I remember Mum's hand, cool and certain, folded over mine. When the verdict came, it arrived as numbers, 12 years. The words sounded heavy enough to hold their own weight. They did not feel like revenge, only consequence. Outside, Leeds was its ordinary self-buses late. Pigeons bowled, rain rehearsing the gutters, and that ordinariness met us like a blanket someone had warmed on the radiator. We walked home slowly and set the chain across with the care of people who know exactly why they are doing it. That night, sleep came without bargaining. It was not triumph. It was relief, shaped like quiet. In the months that followed, we packed our history into boxes that used to hold apples and moved east to a town on the North Yorkshire coast. Our new terrace had a view that tilted towards the sea, and the wind wrote its own diary against the windows. I began counseling with a new team, continued the rituals that had kept us upright Earl Grey at 4, a single true line in the notebook, the chain across as a choice rather than a flinch. I learned the route to the library and volunteered for the Thursday story hour. My voice, which had been careful for years, discovered it could be warm without shaking. Children sat cross-legged, hands hovering like small birds ready to land, and I read them endings that kept their promises. On Sundays we walked the esplanade, counting dogs, letting the salt do its old honest work. Healing did not happen once. It happened again and again, in the way I could pass certain doorways and keep walking, in the way night stopped needing negotiation, in the way laughter returned without looking over its shoulder first. When difficult days arrived, and they did, we turned to the ordinary, as if it were a first aid kit. Light the lamp, stir the soup, ring a friend, breathe longer out than in. If you ask me now at 79, what changed after those 12 years were spoken, I would say this. I learnt to claim the weather of my own house. The rain on the roof, which once sounded like a clock counting down, is now simply weather. The kettle's hum, once an alarm bell, is hospitality. The chain at the door is a ritual of belonging, a way of saying this home answers to us. I do not spend my days thinking about what was taken. I spend them practicing what I can give. Time to a neighbor, a steady voice for a nervous child at the library, a kind word said in a queue. I will never say that pain was the teacher I needed. I will say that courage turned out to be a muscle I could strengthen, and that love, quiet, domestic, stubborn, was the gym where it grew. There is surviving, and there is living. We chose to live, and when the rain starts up, I still make tea. I stand by the window and let the steam blur the world a little, just enough to remember how far we've come and how clean the air is now. If you are listening with a history that pricks at the edges of your day, I would like to offer this without flourish. You are not a problem to be solved. You are a person to be accompanied. There is no timetable for mending. The bravest pace is the one your breath can keep. Put the kettle on if that helps. Stand by a window if you need air. Say only as much as feels safe to someone who has earned the right to hear it. I once thought courage would arrive like a trumpet. In the end, it came as a series of small, repeating notes, clicking the chain because I chose to, asking for help before the room went dark, laying out 2 mugs even on days I wanted none. Pain took up too much space for a long time. Now love is the larger tenant. When the rain begins its steady Yorkshire work across the roof, I let it. Weather is not a threat. It is a season, and seasons change. If you have been taught to live narrow, you may widen by degrees. Tea helps, lamps help, names spoken kindly help, and if all you manage today is to breathe longer out than in, that is already a kind of victory no court can measure and no night can revoke. Here, in this little corner of the internet, we keep a quiet custom. If you feel able, leave one small thing below that helps you feel settled on difficult days. Nothing private. Nothing that exposes you, just a practice that steadies you. It might be, I fold the washing slowly, or I count 7 birds at the window, or I hold a warm mug and stand at the sink. If speaking is not for you tonight, you're just as welcome to leave a gentle wish for anyone who needs it. May your room feel kind. May someone answer the phone. May the rain sound like company, not warning. Read each other's words the way you would accept a biscuit at a neighbor's, with thanks, without prying. We are not here to diagnose or demand. We are here to accompany. If you need professional support, please reach for it locally and let that be an act of strength, not an admission of defeat. And if all you do is sit with us while the kettle hums, you have already kept a difficult promise to yourself. You stayed. I am 79 now. Margaret Maggie of Leeds once and North Yorkshire now. The rain still visits, faithful as ever. The kettle still remembers my favorite mug. The chain still clicks across, not in fear, but in welcome to what is ours. When I turn out the lamp, I do it slowly, the way you draw a curtain on a play that kept its word. Thank you for being here, for listening without asking for proof, for adding your steady note to a song that has more harmony than it used to. If this story finds you on a night that wants to borrow your courage, keep some for yourself and lend only what you can spare. We have come a long way from a 12-year-old silence to a kitchen where words can stand upright. The weather changed, we changed with it, And tomorrow, as ever, we will make tea and go on.